Have you ever thought that your favorite chair, the one you sit in every day without even noticing it anymore, could be quietly pushing your blood pressure in the wrong direction? Not your junk food, not your stress, not the obvious things everyone blames. Your chair, the office chair you sit in for work, the dining chair you stay in after breakfast, scrolling on your phone, the driver's seat on your commute, the couch spot you drop into at night because it feels familiar and comfortable and earned. What if one of the most ordinary parts of your day is also one of the most biologically active? Not because the chair is doing something to you, but because of what your body becomes while you stay in it too long? Enjoying our videos? Please subscribe to Thrive After 60, hit the like button, share this video with your family and friends, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest health tips, senior wellness advice, and practical lifestyle guides. Your support helps our community grow. Now, I want to be careful right from the beginning because this topic gets oversimplified all the time. I am not going to tell you that sitting for 10 minutes is destroying your arteries. I'm not going to call chairs evil, and I'm definitely not going to do that thing where people take a complicated physiological issue and flatten it into a slogan like, sitting is the new smoking, and then just leave it there. That kind of advice sounds dramatic, but it usually teaches you almost nothing. What I want to do instead is much more useful. I want to show you what happens inside the body during prolonged sitting, what happens to blood flow, what happens to the blood vessels in your legs, what happens to the nervous system that helps regulate blood pressure, and why a chair can become a problem, not because it exists, but because of how long and how continuously it keeps you still. And once you see the mechanism, the title of this video is not going to sound dramatic anymore. It's going to sound obvious. That's always the goal here. Not just a rule, a reason. Because when you understand the reason, the habit changes by itself. So let's build this from the ground up. The first thing to understand is that blood pressure is not just some number you get at a clinic once in a while. It is a moment-to-moment reflection of force and resistance inside a living plumbing system. Your heart pumps blood forward. Your arteries either stay flexible and open enough to accommodate that flow, or they don't. Your nervous system constantly adjusts the diameter of blood vessels. Your kidneys influence fluid balance. Your hormones influence constriction and relaxation. It is a dynamic system, not a fixed trait. And because it is dynamic, posture and movement matter more than most people realize. When you are walking, shifting, climbing stairs, or even just changing position often, your muscles, especially the muscles in your legs, are constantly contracting and relaxing. Those contractions help push blood back toward the heart. This is often called the skeletal muscle pump, and it is one of the quiet mechanical systems that keeps circulation efficient throughout the day. But when you sit for long stretches, especially without moving your legs much, that pump goes quiet. And here is where the story gets interesting. Blood does not stop moving when you sit, obviously, but it does redistribute. More of it tends to pool in the lower body. Venous return becomes less efficient. Flow patterns change. The vessel walls in the legs experience less of the frictional force created by healthy blood movement, a force called shear stress. That term may sound technical, but it matters because your blood vessels are not just tubes. They are lined by a thin, active layer of cells called the endothelium, and those cells respond to flow. They sense it. They translate it. They use it as information. When healthy blood flow moves across that lining, the endothelium releases signals that help the blood vessels relax and function properly. One of the big players here is nitric oxide, a molecule that helps vessels dilate. Less healthy flow means less healthy signaling, and that means a vessel that is more likely to stiffen, constrict, and behave badly over time. This is not theoretical. In one controlled study, researchers looked at what happened after just 3 hours of uninterrupted sitting. 3 hours, not 3 months, not 20 years, 3 hours. They found that endothelial function in the leg artery dropped significantly during that sitting period. But when the sitting was interrupted with short walking breaks, that decline was prevented. The biology changed because the flow changed. That is the level of sensitivity we are dealing with. I want you to stop there for a second because I think most people have never been told this clearly enough. Your blood vessels are not only responding to what you eat or whether you exercise 4 times a week, they are responding to the pattern of your day. The rhythm of movement and stillness itself is part of the input. And here's the part most people miss. The chair issue is not only about the blood vessels, it is also about the nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system is constantly regulating blood pressure. One branch, the sympathetic nervous system, is associated with raising alertness, increasing heart rate, and tightening blood vessels when needed. That is useful in the right context. You need that system. But prolonged sitting appears to nudge that system in a direction that may push blood pressure upward, especially diastolic pressure and mean arterial pressure. A randomized crossover trial in healthy young men makes this especially concrete. Participants either spent 3 hours sitting or 3 hours lying down. During the sitting condition, diastolic blood pressure and mean arterial pressure rose over time. Heart rate rose. A measure associated with sympathetic nervous system activity rose. Even leg circumference increased, suggesting fluid retention or pooling in the lower legs. In simple language, the sitting posture created a circulatory environment that the body appeared to compensate for by increasing vascular resistance and sympathetic drive. Think about what that means. You're not sprinting. You're not stressed in the traditional sense. You're not lifting something heavy. You're sitting. And yet inside the body, compensations are happening. Fluid is shifting. Resistance is changing. The nervous system is adjusting. Blood pressure is not passively waiting around. It is responding to the fact that you have become still. Now, somebody will hear this and immediately think, okay, but if sitting raises blood pressure, why doesn't everybody feel it? Because most physiological changes don't announce themselves in a dramatic way. Endothelial dysfunction does not tap you on the shoulder. Mild increases in vascular resistance do not send a warning text. A few millimeters of blood pressure change do not feel like an event. That's part of what makes this issue so easy to ignore. It hides inside normal life. It piggybacks on comfort. It doesn't feel urgent. And because chairs are associated with productivity, relaxation, reading, gaming, driving, eating, and resting, we mentally file them under harmless objects. But chairs are not really the story. Posture is the story. Inactivity is the story. Duration is the story. And uninterrupted duration is the part that seems to matter most. This is also why the phrase, "I work out, so I'm fine," is not always as protective as people think. Exercise is enormously valuable. It improves insulin sensitivity. It improves cardiovascular fitness. It helps blood vessels function better. It lowers risk across a long list of conditions. None of that is in dispute. Public health organizations consistently recommend at least 150 minutes of moderate physical activity per week for good reason. But sitting and exercise are not perfect opposites. You can exercise for 45 minutes in the morning and still spend 10 or 11 hours of the rest of the day mostly seated. From the outside, that looks like an active person. But from the perspective of blood flow and vascular rhythm, that can still be a highly sedentary day. That distinction has become clearer in recent years. Large observational data using wearable devices has suggested that once sedentary time climbs past a certain range, cardiovascular risks start to rise more sharply. In one major data set, around 10.6 hours of sedentary time per day emerged as a potentially important threshold for heart failure and cardiovascular death risk. And importantly, some of that risk remained visible even in people who were otherwise meeting exercise recommendations. That does not mean exercise is useless. It means exercise does not erase everything. Your body is not a spreadsheet where one good behavior cancels out one bad behavior in a perfectly neat way. It is much messier than that, much more interesting than that. and frankly, much less forgiving of long, uninterrupted stillness than most of us assume. Now, I want to spend a little more time on the blood vessel lining because I think this is one of the most underappreciated parts of the whole discussion. The endothelium is a single-cell thick layer lining the inside of your blood vessels. If that sounds fragile, it is, but it is also remarkably sophisticated. It helps control dilation and constriction. It influences inflammation, it influences clotting, it influences how smoothly blood moves through the vascular system. When endothelial function is good, vessels are better able to adapt. When endothelial function is impaired, the entire system becomes a little less graceful. What prolonged sitting seems to do, especially in the lower limbs, is reduce the kind of forward-moving shear stress that the endothelium likes. In one study, researchers actually prevented that decline in endothelial function by locally increasing blood flow in one leg during sitting. The leg where flow was preserved did not show the same impairment. That is an elegant result because it points directly at mechanism. It tells you this is not vague wellness language. The vessel is responding to a specific physical environment. Healthy flow is not cosmetic. It is instruction. It is maintenance. It is part of how the system stays tuned. And when that flow pattern becomes sluggish for hours at a time, the message to the vessel changes. Now let me add another layer because blood pressure is not only about vessel function in the legs, it is also about total peripheral resistance across the body. If blood pooling in the lower limbs increases, if the sympathetic nervous system responds, if vessel tone rises, if arterial flexibility is reduced even temporarily, the pressure system can shift upward. Maybe not dramatically in one afternoon, maybe not enough for you to notice, but biologically, the direction matters. The reason I care about that direction is because people often think risk only begins at the moment a doctor uses the word hypertension. But physiology starts changing before labels show up. Long before a number is high enough to be called a condition, a pattern may already be training the body toward it. That is one of the most important ideas in preventive health. Not that every small change is a disease, but that repeated inputs become patterns. And patterns become outcomes. So if your day repeatedly looks like this, wake up, drive, sit, work, sit, eat, sit, drive, sit, unwind, sit. Then your body is not experiencing those hours as neutral. Your muscles are less active. Your circulation is less dynamic. Your vessels are getting less useful flow input. Your nervous system may be compensating. And if that pattern repeats 5, 6, 7 days a week for years, then what looked harmless starts looking a lot more consequential. Now, I want to be fair here, because the research is not as simple as saying every sitting reduction intervention lowers blood pressure every time. And this is where the topic gets more honest and more interesting. A recent umbrella review looking across systematic reviews and meta-analyses found something important. The evidence linking sedentary behavior to cardiovascular disease outcomes is strong overall, but the specific blood pressure findings are more mixed depending on study design. In other words, the broad risk story is convincing, but blood pressure as an isolated outcome does not move in a perfectly uniform way in every study. That matters because it keeps us from turning this into a cartoon. For example, there was a randomized trial in desk workers with untreated elevated blood pressure where researchers tried to reduce sedentary behavior mainly by increasing standing during the workday. Participants reduced sedentary time by about an hour, mostly replacing it with standing, but blood pressure did not significantly improve over the short intervention period. That sounds disappointing until you notice what was actually changed. Not movement mostly, standing. And standing is not the same thing as moving. This is a really important distinction, and I think it explains a lot of confusion around standing desks. People hear that sitting too long is a problem, so they assume standing all day must be the solution. But biologically, the body seems to care about dynamic movement more than simply changing the angle of your skeleton. Standing may reduce some sitting time. It may help with posture variety. It may change energy expenditure a little. But if standing is mostly static, it does not necessarily recreate the rhythmic calf muscle contractions and circulation benefits that walking, stepping, or even frequent leg movement provide. The system wants motion, not heroic motion, not athletic motion, just recurring motion. This brings us to some of the most practical and most persuasive evidence in the entire area: breaking up sitting. In one study of overweight and obese adults, participants spent 7 hours in sitting conditions that were either uninterrupted or broken up with 2-minute walking bouts every 20 minutes. The result was simple and striking. Both light and moderate walking breaks were associated with lower systolic and diastolic blood pressure compared with uninterrupted sitting. Not a gym session, not an hour-long cardio class, 2 minutes every 20 minutes. That finding changes the emotional tone of the whole conversation, because now we are no longer talking about an impossible lifestyle overhaul. We are talking about pattern interruptions, tiny mechanical resets, little circulation events inserted into a long static day, and those little events appear to matter. Another study found that just 5 minutes of light walking during a 3-hour sitting period was enough to preserve endothelial function when done at intervals. Think about the scale of that. 5 minutes. Not because 5 minutes is magical, but because the body seems highly responsive to the reintroduction of flow. I love this kind of science because it reminds you how adaptive the system is. The body does not always need a dramatic rescue. Sometimes it just needs the signal to change. There's another piece of evidence that brings this out over a longer timeline. In a randomized clinical trial involving older adults, reducing sitting time by about half an hour a day over 6 months was associated with a meaningful drop in systolic blood pressure around 3.5 millimeters of mercury. That may sound small if you're thinking emotionally, but it is not small if you're thinking at population scale. Blood pressure moves in millimeters. Vascular risk accumulates through increments. Small sustained improvements are exactly the kind of thing public health cares about. And here is what I find fascinating about that result. The intervention did not require a reinvention of human life. It required less sitting. Not no sitting, less sitting. That's a completely different message from the one people usually hear. Now, let me bring in the part of this that I think lands hardest for most viewers. Your favorite chair is probably not a problem because of the chair itself. It is a problem because it removes feedback. When you're standing, you shift. When you're walking, you pump blood through your legs. When you're climbing stairs, your muscles demand flow. When you're moving through space, your body stays in conversation with gravity. But a very comfortable chair does something psychologically dangerous. It helps you forget time. It makes stillness feel easy. It reduces the little discomfort signals that might otherwise get you up. It turns one email into 20, one episode into 3, one quick scroll into an hour and 40 minutes. A bad chair annoys you. A good chair can seduce you. And if that good chair becomes the place where you spend 6, 8, 10 hours with very little interruption, then yes, it can absolutely become part of a blood pressure story. Not by magic, not by mystery, by mechanics, by circulation, by vascular biology, by autonomic compensation, by repetition. Now, some of you are probably wondering about the time scale. Are we talking about effects that happen immediately or effects that only matter after years? The answer is both, and that's exactly why the issue matters. Acute studies show that vascular function can change within hours of uninterrupted sitting. Blood pressure markers can shift over the course of a single sitting session. Leg circumference can increase. Shear stress can drop. Endothelial responsiveness can decline. Those are short-term effects, but a short-term effect that happens once is one thing. A short-term effect that happens every workday for a decade is another. That's how lifestyle becomes biology. It's not that one afternoon in a chair rewrites your cardiovascular future. It's that ordinary days repeat. And when a physiological nudge repeats hundreds or thousands of times, it stops being a nudge and starts becoming a pattern your body has to live inside. I also want to touch briefly on why blood pressure can be such a deceptive topic emotionally. People think of high blood pressure as an older person issue or a doctor's office issue. But the behaviors that contribute to it are often very young behaviors. Laptop work, gaming, commuting, streaming, studying, scrolling, remote work, office work. None of these feel like medical events. They feel like modern life. That's why I think this conversation matters so much, because it takes something culturally invisible and makes it visible. It shows you that blood pressure is not only shaped by salt shakers and genetics and stressful meetings. It is also shaped by the geometry of your day, how much time you spend bent at the hips, how often your legs contract, how long your vascular system goes without meaningful movement. And again, I am not saying your chair is the sole cause of anyone's blood pressure problems. That would be ridiculous. Blood pressure is multifactorial. Sleep matters, body weight matters, diet matters, alcohol matters, kidney function matters, age matters, medications matter, stress matters, genetics matter. This is not a one-cause story, but it is also not a story where sitting is too trivial to matter. Now, if you want the practical answer hidden inside the title of this video, here it is. The question is not really, what chair should I buy? The question is, how long does my body stay trapped in the chair before flow changes enough to matter? And the answer from the research seems to be probably less time than you think. That is why the most useful idea here is not furniture optimization. It is interruption design, not perfection, not punishment. Interruption design. How often does the sitting spell break? What kind of break is it? Is it just standing still, or is it actual movement? Because the evidence keeps pointing in the same direction. Dynamic breaks seem more meaningful than static ones. Walking beats standing. Leg movement beats complete stillness. Repeated small resets may matter a lot more than one dramatic effort later. Think about the logic of that. If the problem is reduce shear stress, then restore flow. If the problem is lower leg pooling, then contract the muscles that help move blood upward. If the problem is excessive, uninterrupted sedentary time, then interrupt it. That is not wellness culture. That is almost engineering. Now let me say something that might surprise you. This is not only about people with desk jobs. It's easy to make this an office worker story, but the same pattern shows up in retirement, long commutes, gaming setups, long-haul driving, binge watching, reading marathons, even hobbies that seem healthy on the surface because they are mentally stimulating but physically static. You can be intellectually active and circulatorily stagnant at the same time. And because mental stimulation often makes stillness easier, some of the people most vulnerable to prolonged sitting are not lazy people at all. They are focused people, productive people. People who disappear into work or into interests they care about, people whose chair becomes an extension of attention. That's why I think the title matters emotionally. Your favorite chair. Not the broken chair, not the uncomfortable chair. Your favorite one. The one you trust. The one you don't question. Those are usually the habits that deserve the closest look. So what do you do with all of this information without turning it into fear? I think the healthiest way to think about it is this. The chair is not the enemy, but uninterrupted sitting is a biologically costly state, and your body appears to benefit when you puncture that state regularly with movement. That does not mean obsessing over every minute. It does not mean never sitting down. It does not mean you should panic if you spent an afternoon at your computer. It means recognizing that the cardiovascular system likes rhythm. It likes flow. It likes repeated muscular input. It likes the day to be broken into pieces of movement. If you want a simple image for this, imagine your blood vessels as a system that prefers conversation over silence. Movement is conversation. Sitting too long is silence. The longer the silence goes on, the more the system starts drifting away from its best state. And one more important point before I close. If you already have high blood pressure or if you're worried about it, this topic belongs in a larger conversation, not a smaller one. Sitting patterns matter, but they are one piece of a much bigger picture. The value of this video is not to diagnose anything or turn a chair into a villain. It is to help you notice a mechanism that often goes unnoticed. Because once you notice it, you start seeing your day differently. You start realizing that movement is not only exercise, it is maintenance, it is vascular housekeeping, it is blood flow management hidden inside ordinary life. And then the title becomes less shocking and more precise. Your favorite chair could be raising your blood pressure every day, not because chairs are dangerous objects, but because prolonged stillness changes the physics inside your body. It reduces helpful blood flow patterns in the legs. It can impair endothelial function. It can encourage pooling in the lower body. It can push the nervous system toward more vascular resistance. And when that happens repeatedly, day after day, the body may slowly start adapting to a pattern that is less favorable than the one it was built for. That, to me, is the big idea. Not never sit, not buy this gadget, not fix your whole life tomorrow. Just understand the biology well enough that you stop treating uninterrupted sitting like a harmless blank space in the day. Because it isn't blank. A lot is happening in that chair, more than most people realize. And more than most people have ever been told. So tomorrow, when you settle into the seat you always settle into, whether it's your office chair, your car seat, your kitchen chair, your recliner, your gaming chair, whatever it is, I want you to remember that your cardiovascular system doesn't experience that seat as furniture. It experiences it as a pattern, a posture, a flow environment, a command. And the question is not whether you sit. Of course you do. We all do. The question is how long you disappear into the chair before you give your blood vessels a reason to wake back up. If this video changed the way you think about something as ordinary as sitting, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you want, leave a comment telling me what part surprised you most. The blood pooling, the endothelial changes, or the fact that a few minutes of movement can make such a measurable difference. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.